excerpts from the Cratylus dialogue, and let me tell you,
It's a wild ride, this dialogue. We've got Socrates in there, of course, and he's chatting with Hermogenes and Cratylus. And the whole thing revolves around this deceptively simple question.
what's in a name?
Right.
Like, what are names really all about?
Yeah, are they just sounds, just labels we slap on things? Or is there something more to it?
Is there some kind of inherent rightness to a name? Like, does it actually reflect some deeper truth about the thing it's naming?
And that's the central debate in the Cratylus. You've got Hermogenes arguing that names are purely conventional, just a matter of human agreement.
Practical guy, Hermogenes.
And then you've got Cratylus on the other side. He's convinced that names have a natural correctness, like they're somehow woven into the fabric of reality.
So how does Hermogenes make his case for this conventional view of names?
Well, he starts by saying that names are established by convention and agreement. Basically, we as a community, we decide to call something a certain thing, and that's that.
Seems straightforward enough.
Right, like any name we assign does the job. And he even uses the example of slaves, how their names are often changed.
Makes sense. That was common practice back then.
But he points out that even with a new name, it still works. It still refers to that specific person. So for Hermogenes, there's no need to look for some deeper meaning.
But Cratylus isn't buying it. He's got this strong sense that there's a deeper connection between a name and the thing it's naming, right?
Oh, yeah, he pushes back hard. He says, look, names have this inherent truth or correctness to them.
Interesting. So it's not just about what we happen to call something. It's about finding the name that truly fits.
Exactly. And he's adamant that this correctness is universal. He says it's the same for Hellenes as for barbarians.
Meaning it transcends cultural differences.
Yeah, so it's not just about our particular language or customs. He seems to believe there's a true name out there waiting to be discovered that perfectly captures the essence of the thing.
So we've got these two very different perspectives, and where does Socrates fit into all of this?
Well, as you might expect, Socrates jumps in with his signature style, starts asking probing questions. He first addresses Hermogenes and brings up this interesting analogy.
Lay it on us.
He says, look, we can make statements that are true or false, right? So if that's the case, maybe the parts of those statements, the names themselves, could also have a degree of correctness or incorrectness.
Ooh, that's a subtle but important point.
Yeah, it's like he's saying if our descriptions of the world can be accurate or inaccurate, then maybe the words we use in those descriptions aren't completely arbitrary either.
Makes you think twice about just taking names at face value.
Right. And then Socrates goes even deeper. He starts poking at the foundations of this whole idea of relativism, the notion that everything is subjective, there's no absolute truth.
Always a tricky topic.
He brings up Protagoras, that famous philosopher who said, man is the measure of all things. Basically, the idea that truth is relative to each individual's perception.
So what's wrong with that, according to Socrates?
Well, he asks this pointed question. If everything is just a matter of opinion, how can we even talk about wisdom or folly? If whatever seems true to each person is true for them, then how can we say one person is wiser than another?
Yeah, that gets to the heart of it. If there's no objective standard, then expertise and knowledge kind of lose their meaning.
Exactly. And he doesn't stop there. He also takes aim at this idea from another philosopher, Euthydemus, who claimed that all things belong equally to all people.
So like a universal sharing situation.
Yeah, but Socrates questions how we could possibly differentiate between good and bad in that scenario. If virtue and vice are just universally attributed, then the distinction between them becomes meaningless.
So by questioning these relativistic views, is Socrates setting the stage for the possibility that things actually do have an inherent nature, something that's not just based on our opinions?
Precisely. He suggests that if these relativistic ideas don't hold up, then things must have their own proper and permanent essence that exists independent of our subjective experiences.
So they have a kind of objective reality.
Right, a nature that's defined by something more than just our fleeting perceptions.
And he doesn't just limit this to objects, right? He extends this idea of an inherent nature to actions as well.
Exactly. He uses the examples of cutting and burning, saying you can't just do those things with any instrument or in any way you please.
There's a right way to do it.
Yeah, there's a natural way to perform those actions and a proper instrument that's best suited for the task. And then he makes this brilliant connection to speaking and naming.
So like there's a right way to name things too.
That's what he's suggesting. He argues that effective naming also follows a natural process, using the proper instrument, which is the name itself, to accurately reflect the thing being named.
That leads to this fascinating idea of the name as a tool, doesn't it?
It does. He compares it to other tools, like a shuttle used for weaving or an awl for piercing.
Each tool has its specific purpose.
Right, and just like a skilled weaver uses a shuttle crafted by a carpenter, the one who imparts names, the teacher, so to speak, is using the work of the legislator.
The legislator being the one who originally creates the names.
Exactly, and Socrates makes it clear that not just anyone can be a legislator of names.
It takes a certain skill, a certain understanding.
Yeah, he calls them a maker of names and compares them to a carpenter crafting a shuttle.
So they have to carefully consider the form and function of the name they're creating.
Precisely. They have to look to the form naturally fitted for the thing being named, just like a carpenter considers the properties of wood when making a shuttle. And he even talks about a true or ideal shuttle that serves as a perfect model.
So is he implying that there's a similar ideal form for names, a true natural name that the legislator is trying to discern and imitate?
That seems to be the suggestion. They're trying to capture the essence of the thing in sounds and syllables.
While acknowledging that different legislators might use slightly different syllables, just like different smiths might use different pieces of iron.
Right. But the underlying proper form of the name, its essential nature, should remain consistent.
And who gets to decide whether these legislators have done a good job? Who judges the quality of the names they've created?
Well, Socrates says it's the user, the one who knows how to engage in questioning and answering, the dialectician.
So it's not just about blindly accepting the names we're given, it's about critically examining them.
Yeah, just like a weaver is best suited to judge the quality of a shuttle, or a lyre player the quality of a lyre, the dialectician is best equipped to assess whether a name truly reflects the thing it represents.
That's really interesting. He's elevating the role of critical thinking and dialogue in evaluating language itself.
It's a crucial aspect of his philosophy. And then, to further support this idea of naturally correct names, he turns to authority and tradition.
Ah, so he's bringing in some heavy hitters now.
Exactly. He mentions the sophists, those renowned experts in various subjects, including language. He suggests seeking their wisdom, though Hermogenes is a bit hesitant about that.
Given his disagreement with Protagoras, that makes sense.
Right, and then Socrates turns to the epic poet Homer, pointing out instances where Homer distinguishes between names given by gods and names given by men.
Like that river, Xanthus, which the gods call by that name, but mortals call Scamander.
Precisely. And Socrates reasons that the gods, with their superior wisdom and understanding, would naturally use the right and natural names.
So there's a hint of a divine standard of correctness in naming.
Yeah, even if it's not fully accessible to us mere mortals. And he also dives into Homer's naming of Hector's son, looking at the two names used, Astyanax and Scamandrius.
Go on.
He points out that Astyanax, meaning king of the city, was the name given by the men of Troy, whom Homer considered wiser than the women.
And since Hector was the defender of the city, that name seems fitting.
Exactly. So Socrates suggests that Astyanax is the more appropriate and therefore more correct name. He even draws a connection between Hector's name, which means holder, and the word anax, meaning king.
Like there's a shared underlying meaning there.
Right. And it all points to this principle of natural correspondence in names, this idea that a name should ideally reflect the essential nature or key qualities of the thing being named.
Just like a lion cub is called a lion and a foal, a horse.
Exactly. It's about inheritance, carrying on the name that reflects the lineage. And he extends this to the idea that a king's son should, in meaning, be called a king as well, even if the specific syllables are different.
So the meaning takes precedence over exact phonetic similarity.
Absolutely. He uses the example of letter names like beta, where you have added letters, but the fundamental meaning remains the same. He says the intention of the name giver, the core meaning they're trying to convey, is what matters most.
And he even uses those mythological figures like Orestes, Agamemnon, and Atreus to illustrate how names can seemingly reflect a person's character or destiny.
Yeah, it's like he's engaging in this early form of etymological analysis, trying to uncover the hidden meanings within names. Like with Agamemnon, he connects it to admirable for remaining, which fits with his long and steadfast leadership during the Trojan War.
And Tantalus, whose name he links to being weighed down, which reflects the burdens and punishments he endured.
It's fascinating how he's trying to find these connections, these hints of inherent appropriateness in names.
And then he takes this etymological exploration even further, right? He starts looking at the names of the gods themselves.
He does, and he gets pretty playful and speculative with it. Like, he suggests that theos, the Greek word for gods, might be derived from their moving and running nature.
Interesting. So their very name reflects their activity and dynamism.
Right, and he connects demons to the idea of being knowing or wise, and heroes to Eros, the god of love, or perhaps to the ability to ask questions.
It's like he's trying to find a rationale, a natural connection, even in these divine names.
And he does the same with human-related terms. Anthropos, meaning man, he interprets as he who looks up at what he sees. And psyche, the soul, he tentatively connects to breath, or that which carries and holds nature. And thoma, the body, he speculates, might mean a kind of prison or enclosure for the soul.
So even in these fundamental terms for human existence, he's looking for these deeper, hidden meanings.
And he acknowledges that we might not fully grasp the true meaning of the God's own self-given names. It's like there's a limit to our human understanding.
Makes sense. There are always mysteries beyond our grasp.
But he doesn't let that stop him from exploring. He goes on to analyze a whole bunch of deities: Hestia, Rhea, Kronos, Ocean, Poseidon, Hades, Demeter, Apollo, the Muses, Artemis, Dionysus, Aphrodite, Athena, Hephaestus, Ares, Hermes, Iris, Pan, you name it.
Wow, he's really covered the whole pantheon.
And he's drawing connections to their roles, attributes, and myths. Like, he links Dionysus to being the giver of wine and Aphrodite to being born from foam.
It's like a whirlwind tour of Greek mythology and language all rolled into one.
And he doesn't stop there. He even examines celestial bodies and abstract concepts, like the sun, the moon, stars, fire, water, air, earth, seasons, and the year.
So he's not just looking at names for concrete things. He's also exploring the names we give to these broader forces and cycles.
Exactly. He's trying to see if there's a natural connection between the name and the thing being named, even in these more abstract cases. And what's interesting is how often he finds this theme of motion or its absence in these etymologies.
That does seem to be a recurring motif.
Right. And it might be a reflection of this prevailing philosophical view of constant change in the world. You know, this idea that everything is in flux.
Like Heraclitus and his famous saying, everything flows.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder if the original name givers were influenced by this concept of perpetual motion and change.
It's a really intriguing line of thought, but then Socrates shifts gears a bit and focuses on the very building blocks of language, the letters themselves.
Yeah, he says if names have inherent meaning, then the individual letters that make up those names must also carry some kind of inherent quality.
So he's trying to break it down to the most fundamental level.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of deaf and dumb people communicating through physical gestures, suggesting that names are kind of like a vocal imitation of the things they represent.
Like they're trying to capture the essence of the thing through sound.
And he goes on to speculate about the imitative nature of different letters. He associates the rolling sound of rho with motion, iota with subtle elements and movement, the breathy sounds of phi, psi, sigma, and e with breathiness itself.
And delta and tau, with their more stopped sounds, he relates to binding and rest.
Right, and he connects lambda to smoothness, gamma to a heavier, stickier quality, nu to inwardness, alpha to size, eta and nu to length, and omicron to roundness.
It's a pretty wild attempt to ground the naturalistic view of names in the very sounds of the alphabet.
I know, right? It's highly speculative, but it's fascinating to see him try to connect these fundamental sounds to certain qualities or actions.
And he's not afraid to acknowledge the challenges and limitations of this analysis. He even dismisses simpler explanations for the correctness of names, like divine origin or foreign roots, as just excuses for a lack of real understanding.
He's really pushing for a deeper, more reasoned explanation, and this all leads to this great debate between Socrates and Cratylus about whether names can ever be wrong.
So we're getting to the heart of the matter now.
Cratylus is pretty adamant that a name that's incorrectly applied is not a name at all. It fails to fulfill its purpose of accurately reflecting the thing.
But Socrates pushes back on that.
He does. He uses the analogy of a picture, saying an imperfect representation can still be recognized as a picture, even if it doesn't capture every single detail perfectly.
This is not an all-or-nothing situation.
Right, and then he throws out this thought-provoking question to Cratylus. He says, imagine a perfect copy of you. Would that actually be you, or just an image of you? It's like he's saying that representations, whether visual or linguistic, don't have to be exact replicas to still be effective. He also brings up the example of letter names with additions, like beta, showing that minor variations don't completely negate a name's function.
So language has a certain flexibility, a capacity to adapt and evolve.
Exactly. He argues that language isn't static, it changes over time. Letters are added, removed, their positions are altered, but we're still able to understand each other. And this leads to his point about the important role of convention alongside any inherent resemblance.
So even if there is some natural connection between names and things, human agreement still plays a part.
Absolutely. He asks Cratylus straight up, are names representative because of inherent likeness or because of chance convention? And while Cratylus prefers likeness, Socrates counters with the example of skleros, meaning hard, and the Eritrean form skleroter.
Showing how different letters can convey the same meaning due to custom and agreement.
Yeah, and he argues that convention can establish meaning even through elements that don't inherently resemble the thing being named, and he throws out this challenge to the pure likeness argument. How do you find a phonetic resemblance for an abstract concept like the number 5?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It really highlights the limits of trying to find purely imitative names for everything. Socrates suggests that while resemblance might be ideal in some cases, convention is this necessary tool, this mechanical aid that helps us achieve correctness and understanding, especially when it comes to abstract ideas.
So it's a balance between those two forces.
Right, likeness and convention working together. And then he gets into this discussion about the purpose of names, which is ultimately to inform. But while Cratylus believes that knowing the name is equivalent to knowing the thing itself because of this supposed similarity, Socrates isn't so sure.
He's got doubts about relying solely on names, on these imitations, for true understanding.
He questions whether it's really the best way to learn about the world. He suggests that directly studying the things themselves might be a more effective path to knowledge.
Getting firsthand experience, not just relying on labels.
Exactly. And he even cautiously about the potential for being misled if the original name givers had flawed understandings. He's like, consistency in names doesn't guarantee truth if the foundation is shaky.
Which brings us back to that theme of motion and flux that we saw earlier.
Yes, Cratylus is convinced that names primarily express this constant state of change, but Socrates throws out some counterexamples, words like episteme, knowledge, babaion, sure, historia, enquiry, piston, faithful, and mneme, memory.
Words that suggest states of rest or stability.
Exactly, challenging this idea that universal flux is reflected in all names. And he also points out the absurdity of relying on majority rule to determine the correctness of names. Just because a lot of names might suggest motion doesn't make it inherently true.
It's about finding a more reliable standard of truth.
And then he raises this really interesting paradox. He asks, did the first legislators, the ones who gave the original names, have knowledge of the things they were naming before they gave them names?
That's a tricky one.
If knowledge could only be obtained through names, then how could the whole process of naming even begin? It's a chicken and egg situation. And this leads Socrates to speculate that maybe there was a power more than human involved in those earliest acts of naming.
Like something beyond our comprehension set the whole thing in motion.
It's a thought-provoking suggestion, and in the end, what's Socrates' overall conclusion?
Well, he says that to truly judge the correctness of names, we need a standard of truth that exists independently of names themselves. We can't just rely on language alone to tell us what's real.
Right, and he warns against being overly influenced by this idea of constant flux that seems to be reflected in many names, suggesting that there might be things like absolute beauty or absolute good, these unchanging realities that exist beyond our ever-shifting perceptions.
So he's not completely dismissing the idea of inherent meaning in names, but he's also urging caution, urging critical thinking, and independent exploration of truth.
It's a nuanced perspective, as always with Socrates, and despite all of Socrates' probing questions, Cratylus still ends up leaning towards that Heraclitean philosophy of flux, this idea that everything is in constant motion.
So even after this deep dive into language and the nature of names, there's no easy answer.
Exactly, it's an ongoing exploration. But through this dialogue, we've been exposed to these fascinating ideas about the name giver as a skilled artisan, the potential for inherent meaning in the sounds of language, the interplay between likeness and convention in how we communicate, and ultimately this reminder from Socrates that true understanding requires us to engage directly with reality, not just with the names we give it.
It really challenges us to think about our own relationship with language, doesn't it?
Right.
Like, do we feel that our words somehow capture the essence of things, or do we see them more as tools for social agreement?
And how does that perspective shape how we learn and communicate? It's definitely something worth pondering. If you're intrigued by these questions, I highly recommend checking out Plato's Cratylus in its entirety. It's a conversation that continues to resonate across the centuries.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep those questions coming, and until next time, stay curious.